Welcome everyone to our training on the National Weather Service's flood inundation real-time mapping. And we'll have Shawn from the National Weather Service presenting here. I'm Seal Strauss, I'm the State Floodplain Manager, and I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, thank you, Seal. And hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for having me on to talk today about flood inundation mapping. Just a quick intro. I just started as the senior service hydrologist here at the Weather Service office in the Twin Cities in July. Been in the Weather Service for 15 years, spent the first 10 as a forecaster here at this office, and then I moved literally across the hall into the River Forecast Center. We have a separate River Forecast Center that focuses, their sole job is to forecast the river levels and flow. Spent the last 5.5 years or so there. Now back in the weather forecast office side as the senior service hydrologist. So please, if you have any questions for me, I have my email on the end. Happy to talk with folks and help get you information or get you the right contacts for questions you may have. Even if it's not for my office, I can connect you with other weather service offices like Duluth, Grand Forks, Sioux Falls, La Crosse. They all serve portions of the state as well. So flood inundation mapping from the Weather Service was just unrolled, if you will, in early September. It became live for part of Minnesota, not all of Minnesota, and I'll get into that here in a minute and show you the map and the plan there. But for most of southern Minnesota, September 3rd, it became live on our website. And so we're going to get into today what that is and hopefully teach you guys how to access it and how to use it. And how to work with us on using it too going forward. So have a quick here agenda. So what we're going to talk about. We'll give an overview on what is FIM, and FIM I'll use that acronym a lot. So flood inundation mapping. I'll try to avoid acronyms as much as I can. NOAA actually stands for the National Organization for the Advancement of Acronyms. That's the real NOAA. No, I'm just kidding. But we do have a lot of acronyms, so I'll try to make sure I steer clear of those. So, but FIM, I think, is what you can remember. So we have a couple different types of FIM. We'll talk about those. Some are static, meaning that they're always available and they don't change. So think of things like if we wanted to see what a map would look like if an area was at minor flood stage along a river, you could go and look at that once it's published. Versus dynamic, which are changing based on the current situation. So we'll do some demo later. But for example, Montevideo on the Minnesota River currently is at action stage. So there are some dynamic FIMs available for that right now because the water is at action. And anytime it's at action or above, a lot of those become available. How to use FIM to make decisions, basically. How can we at the Weather Service support all of our partners with this new service with FIM? So we'll get into that. I want to make sure everyone understands like our implementation process and just how we plan to go along and improve the FIM and adjust it as time goes on. Being a brand new service, it's in its infancy really, and it needs to become mature, and that's going to take time. Being that it's in its infancy, it's going to have some issues that we want to improve upon. It is a model after all, modeling where the water will go as the river rises, and so it's going to have some issues that just need to be corrected over time. So that's where I look to a lot of our partners to help us, if they can, report on what they're seeing in the real world when flooding happens and things like that. So including just notes of what flooded, what didn't, images like from drone imagery is great. We could take all that information and work with our National Water Center, which is down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. There's a national center there focused on all things water for the Weather Service, and they are the creators of this FIM. And so we work with them to improve it. And then we're going to talk about how to view FIM. There's a couple different ways. And so I'm going to demo some FIM today. And so, yeah, we'll keep rolling here. So what is flood inundation mapping? So many of you might already be familiar with it, but we're trying to put water on a map. There's a good image there on the left. You can see the blue areas in the map there are areas that this FIM is depicting inundation for a certain level from that river there that you can see running sort of from west to east across the screen. We want to emphasize that we're just currently predicting the extent of the flooded waters, but we're not able to do depth currently. That is in a future plan in the next couple of years to try to start to talk about how deep is the water in a certain area. But right now, we can just do extent of the floodwaters. So, but we believe that, if we combine these FIM visualizations with satellite images like this one, we can really help prepare for flood events and respond to for our communities, and have an idea of where to look, what roads to check, what bridges to check, what homes to check, things like that. As rivers rise during flooding, and then as in a planning sense too, kind of knowing, hey, if this river gets to major flood stage, we need to check these locations because the FIM is showing that they should be underwater. Um, if you're familiar with weather service offices in the state, I kind of mentioned a couple of them, and I've already got some abbreviations in here, but it's like I said, it's currently live for our area, which is most of the southern and central part of the state, and then including La Crosse and Sioux Falls areas of Minnesota, so the southeast and southwest corners of the state it's live for. I'll show you a map exactly laying that out here shortly. For the northern half of the state, it's coming next year, about a year from now, maybe even in the summer. So you'll be hearing more and more about that from your local offices. Here's our map and our implementation plan for the whole nation. So for Minnesota, the orange areas were unrolled here in September. So we started with a couple years ago, actually, with these green areas down near Houston, Texas, and then out in the Northeast. This is all based upon how much of the United States population we are serving. And so they kind of planned it in different waves here, year by year, 10% back in 2023. Then it got to 30% of the population in the blue areas by 2024. Now we're serving roughly 60% of the nation by currently this month here currently, and then by next fall, near 100% of the U.S. population will be served by FIM services. So Duluth and Grand Forks there in the north are in that kind of teal color, so they'll be coming next year. And by the way, part of my role here in the Twin Cities office is to support the Duluth Weather Service office, as they don't have an actual service hydrologist per se, but they do have a couple forecasters on staff who are their hydro experts and focal points, we refer to them as. But part of my role is going to be helping them unroll FIM services to their area as well. A quick comparison here. What you see on the left there is a flood warning, standard flood warning text product for the Kickapoo. This is for the Kickapoo River, actually in Ontario, Wisconsin there. And so this is a good example. It's got a couple things to look at. And so what you see on the left is just the standard. Here's the warning that we issue, the flood warning for the river. What you see on the right, though, is then the associated FIM that could be used to help lay out, okay, where am I really concerned about? And so if you look, this east-south street that kind of runs right through town towards Ontario, where it says Ontario there, you can see where the river is, it's showing that it's inundated. And so there's another road, 131, that goes north out of Ontario, that's north there, shows that it's underwater as well. And so we lay out some of these impacts on the actual flood warning, but it's nice to be able to see it on a map. And you may already be wondering, are these images just static, or are these interactive? And I'll show you that later, but of course we have an interactive map display for you to zoom way in, change your opacity, things like that to see what is being flooded. And we also have ability for you, if you have your own internal GIS display capabilities, you can take these services, these FIM services, and pull them into your own GIS displays and use them that way as well. So a little bit about the FIM development process. This is kind of a crazy looking map. The key here is that we're going with over 3 million river miles across the U.S. with FIM services, and so a lot of that is ungauged river miles, of course, in sections. And so in the red, we're using the National Water Model reaches to define that. And the National Water Model is a model generated down at our water center to try to model the flow across all these river reaches across the country. So a lot of issues with that, of course, because you don't have what we call ground truth. We don't have a gauge to keep in check the model. Is it on par? Is it correct right now? So there's a lot as much as possible quality control of that, and is it realistic? This is why, and I'll keep repeating this over time, that if you're using FIM and you're using the water model version of FIM to look at your area, take it with a grain of salt and just know that it's a model. And I would say talk to us, contact your local weather service office and see if the weather service thinks it's a viable depiction of reality or not, because sometimes the water model will have struggles in certain areas for sure. And so that's one of the things we're prepared to do is help our partners decide, like, should I use this in this event, or is it something I really need to take as more of it's just guidance, but it's not going to have a real high level of accuracy for exactly where it's showing the water spreading. The blue stretches are downstream of gauges or forecast points, so they're going to have a bit more confidence because we're observing the river the river levels in the flow, and obviously using rating curves to convert the stage to flow. But we have more confidence because at least we have observational data for a lot of places. So, but again, this has been a huge years-long project, and it's not over just because it's implemented. I think a lot of the work's just getting started now to, when flood events happen, to make this better for the future, to be able to take, reality of what we see in a flood event and adjust the FIM and adjust the water model based on what's happened. How do we go about modeling where the water will go? We use this method called HAND. It stands for height above nearest drainage. And those three images are kind of cool. They kind of depict how we use 10-meter grid cells and divide up a known area and show as the river rises what will become inundated. So it's a 10-meter digital elevation model that we're using. It forms each grid representative to that relative elevation model. And then each of those basins are related back to a relative point, which we would call, a 0 foot level, to determine what the stage would need to be to inundate that grid. So that's just a quick showing. I like the images. They probably tell you a lot more than just the words on the screen, but you can kind of see those numbers on the right are like the elevation relative to that 0 level of each grid cell there. And as the water rises in the model, it will spread that water out based on those elevations of those grid cells. Some strengths and weaknesses of this method. It's used for many different FIMs by many different agencies. It's a commonly used method for creating a flood inundation map. It's a fundamental and reliable method overall, and the computational cost is really relatively low. So we can compute this for the nation, and it doesn't cause a huge computational workload to do that. But it has some limitations for sure. Are all listed here. There's no physics applied to it. It's not a hydraulic model. It lacks bathymetry, which definitely impacts its potential accuracy. I will take note, though, that bathymetry is starting to be added to certain areas of the country. I know they're working on the Ohio River currently to add bathymetry, so that area can get better served by the FIM. And they're using a different method called Ripple instead of HAND. So HAND is a baseline. Now we're starting to see improvements being planned out to add bathymetry and use even more advanced methods to inundate, like Ripple. FIM inaccuracies exist at and near levee areas. The big thing to know there is if you have a levee in your community, the FIM, what it shows is going to always assume that levee does not fail. If a levee fails, FIM's kind of out the window because it assumes a levee holds. So obviously that'd be a really bad scenario when that happens, but just FYI, FIM assumes levees do not fail. The other thing about HAND, we're modeling the flow of the river and then converting it to a stage. That's how we forecast in the Weather Service. So we model the flow downstream and then we convert to stage. Well, backwater is a different beast. And so when we have backwater effects, the HAND method does not account for that because it's trying to key off of a flow and then use a synthetic rating curve to develop its FIM. With backwater issues and the flow being kind of out the window due to that, it does not account for backwater. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why I say call us, talk to me, talk to my counterparts at the other Weather Service offices. And if you're looking at using FIM, and these are the things we'll be able to watch out for and say, hey, I know you're seeing that area is inundated, but it's not accounting for this backwater. And so it's under assessing what the inundation is really going to be. It's going to be worse than that due to backwater, for example. Unfortunately, this hand FIM does not produce accurate water body inundation, aka lakes. And I know, like folks in Waterville, for instance, there's 2 lakes there. Currently, hand does not have a way to model that, especially with the lack of flow there. It's a lake. So you'll see on the FIM, the lakes are usually masked out. They're kind of grayed out, and they should be. Now, will it be like that forever? We hope not. There are plans in place to try to account for rising lakes and where they'll spread. But the current, in its infancy here, it doesn't have an ability to do that. But as we get this FIM product to become mature over the years, we hope to expand on those abilities for sure. And then there's catchment boundary issues. They can cause under or overestimation of inundation just based on all the little catchment boundaries and where the water flows. We see that sometimes there's been a lot of work already done to improve that by the Water Center. There's actually a new version of FIM. There's different versions of FIM. The one you see on our website is always going to be the latest and greatest, but we are currently on FIM version 5, and each version they do some sort of update or upgrade to the FIM across the nation. And so actually next week we're getting FIM version 6, which is exciting because the catchment boundary issue that we have been seeing with the previous FIM versions, the current FIM version, they've found a pretty good way to handle that across a large area fix in that. So a lot of the catchment boundary issues are being improved upon as early as next week. We still may have some out there, but overall it's an improvement for most of the country. And then just getting into why is the Weather Service creating this and investing so much into this? Well, one example is Hurricane Harvey. If many of you remember that back in 2017, just otherworldly amounts of rainfall in South Texas there along the Gulf, 40 inches in just a few days. The images on the right kind of show that. They show the flood watches and warnings as well. The image on the bottom right shows all the green boxes and polygons are all flash flood warnings. And so there's a lot, the whole area got all these warnings and things like that. But what those polygons, those warnings don't tell us, they don't give us the whole picture. So, the questions listed out here, if you were an emergency manager or a preparedness person, public safety person in that area, where do I focus my attention on first? There's so much rain coming, there's so much flooding expected, who do we evacuate? What roads we need to be watching out for? How do we even approach the impacted town? From what direction can we get to it? Can we get into an area that's flooded? How bad can it be? What's the reasonable worst case scenario that we could see? Things like that. So that was one big reason, in the aftermath of that event, that a lot of the emergency manager and folks who work in that field told the Weather Service was having the flooding laid out on a map to be able to see where and when would be critical information to have. So as we go forward here, this is an example from just last September. This is down in North Carolina. So Hurricane Helene, I'm sure many of you remember since it was not too long ago and was such an extreme flood event. This was an example of how FIM was actually used in a live scenario. And so this is one of the graphics that we commonly issue in the Weather Service and we send out to our partners. And it shows you on the lower right, I'll draw your attention there first. That's the old kind of AHAPS hydrograph display, which actually still do exist. And so you can see in that the forecast was to go to the record level for this area here near Asheville. And so the FIM associated with that used in this messaging was the record FIM, because we can have FIMs defined for action stage, minor, moderate, major, and record. And so they all exist. They're already in a library, a digital library, ready to be pulled off the shelf, if you will. So in this case, they were able to pull up the record FIM and say, well, the forecast is record, hitting the record right about. And so we're going to show that. And so you can just see the extreme amount of extent of the river here in this area with all the roads and the home or the buildings and infrastructure flooded. So, and one question, and I hope, and maybe it is obvious, but just in case it's not, when you see a FIM, covering all these buildings, it's not like the buildings are underwater. It's just that the base of them, the flood extent is getting to them. And again, we don't do depth currently, so you have to kind of use your own judgment. As you get closer to the river, the deeper the water will be, of course. And as you get further into the edge of it, it'll be shallower. But so yeah, this actually did come to fruition for the most part in Asheville. This area was indeed all flooded here, as the map was showing pretty close. So, and that's why, and when they sent this out to their partners down in North Carolina, they felt they had assessed this, they had quality controlled it, and decided, yeah, we think it's pretty on track, pretty good, and so we're going to use it. So this is something that, as flood events happen in the future, that our local Minnesota Weather Service offices will start to do as well. Here's another example from that same storm. This one was in Irwin, Tennessee. This was a small hospital just off the interstate. You can kind of see the terrain on the right-hand side. This area gets flash flooding issues quickly due to that terrain. So a little different than most of Minnesota. We have some terrain, certainly, especially in the southeast part of the state, northeast part of the state. But this example kind of showed, hey, this hospital, I can see it right on the map. If this amount of rain happens, it's showing it inundated. And sure enough, there's a picture of the hospital there in the middle. A bunch of people standing on the roof, and you can see some cars parked over on that dry spot. That's actually an island, so it's not like they could just try to swim their way over to their car and drive off. Those cars were on a little island there. How high will the water, what will the water get? Will the interstate be affected? All those things that can help answer questions. Real quick side story on this event, that hospital actually was not designed to have a helicopter land on the roof. And so they had to make a decision. They were really worried about the structure. You can see the torrent of water behind here. And they were really worried about, will this structure hold through this flood event? Are we really safe just standing on the roof, or is this whole thing going to get washed away? And the helicopter pilots decided to risk their own lives and landed a helicopter on that roof, even though it wasn't designed for it. And they weren't sure if it was going to hold the weight of the helicopter, but it did. There was no injuries or fatalities from this hospital. They got all those people off that roof via helicopter. So, but kind of a crazy story. But yeah, again, built in sort of a floodplain there, and the FIM can help show that kind of thing. So, and in a planning sense, knowing where you have critical infrastructure that's at risk is good to know. I'll get into now the different types of FIM that we have available. So there's actually 5 different FIMs here I have, but I break them out into 2 categories: static FIM versus dynamic. Touched on this earlier. Static FIM are the ones that are, once they're published, they're always available. You could look at it any time of year. You could use it to kind of make some plans for your area. So we have 2 different things here going on. One of them is not what we call partner FIM, are FIMs that we have access to and we actually publish on our website that were generated by partners of ours. I'll show you an example of that coming up. City of St. Paul has a partner FIM through the Corps of Engineers that we are able to display. That's the only one I know of in the MPX, in the Twin Cities office forecast area currently. So they're pretty limited on their availability. The categorical FIM, those are going to be FIMs for any National Weather Service river forecast point, so official forecast points. So if you go to our website and click on rivers and lakes, and you look at the map of Minnesota, there's a lot of data points out there that are just kind of gray icons. Those aren't going to have categorical FIM. And even some of the ones that have a green icon or a different color, if they're not a USGS gauge and an official forecast point, then they won't have the cat FIM either. Sorry, I just said a cat FIM, but categorical FIM either. But we do have a lot of official river forecast points here in the state, and those will have categorical FIMs available. And what are those? So those are a FIM library for, like I said, action stage, minor flooding, moderate flooding, major flooding, and record flooding for that location, and 5 miles up and downstream of that location, as long as there's not a major confluence up or downstream that impacts it. And so those categorical FIMs are going to be very helpful for in a planning sense. If you have an area that's an official river forecast point near you, you can go and look at those. I'll show you how to access those later. I do want to say while we're on the topic, and I'll probably say it again later, that those need to be quality controlled and published by the Weather Service before they hit our public facing website. So currently, since we just unrolled FIM in less than a month ago, we don't have any in Minnesota published yet, but we are currently working on that. Myself and my counterparts at the other Weather Service offices are in the process of assessing those FIMs. So what we're doing is we're looking at them in great detail and just making sure that there aren't issues that, like discontinuities, catchment boundary issues, unrealistic depictions of what might happen, things like that. And as we're doing that, we're reporting those issues to the Water Center, who then fixes those. And once they're fixed, then we will publish these categorical FIMs to our website. I'll also say, once I do publish a categorical FIM, let's just say since I talked about Montevideo earlier, I would take a point to reach out to some of our partners in that area, including the emergency managers in the counties in that area, and let them know that's available, just so you don't have to keep searching and wondering when it's going to be posted. So just give you a little bit of a notification that that is available if you'd like to use it. Now, the dynamic FIM, these are going to be FIMs that are available based on what the current situation is, and only when river levels exceed high water. And what I mean by high water is action stage. And so if you go to our website now, and I'll show you later, much of Minnesota, if you click on the FIM, any of these FIM types of services here, they're not going to have a whole lot to show right now because most of the area is not experiencing high water. Now, we'll be able to look at out in western Minnesota where there's action stage currently, and you will see some FIM. But just so you know, they're high water only. And so they're not always going to have some FIM. Anytime we're below action stage, they won't show anything. So just know that, so you're not looking for something and confused why you're not seeing anything. I will get into now a little bit more about what each of these are. Have a couple examples here, and kind of like what we're teaching our staff here is the reliability. And so what I want to kind of talk about right now is these 5 different FIMs that are laid out on the screen. The top one, the partner FIM libraries, like the Corps of Engineer FIM from the city of St. Paul, those are kind of going to be our highest quality FIMs. As we go down the list, our quality will go down, but our coverage goes way up. So for the country, the partner FIMs cover less than 1,000 miles of river mile, but by the time we get to the water model, the last 2 here, that goes from 1,000 miles of coverage to over 3.4 million miles of coverage across the nation. So, and the reason for the decrease in quality I kind of talked about earlier, as we get into the water model, that's all modeled. There's no tie to ground truth. There's no tie to observational networks. And so without observing what the flow is, what the river level actually is, and we're just modeling it, our confidence is going to be lower, of course, in what it's putting out. So whereas, the higher ones up here are, they're modeled much differently, and they have observational data to go along with them to help us tweak those. So I talked about the partner FIM. I talked a little bit about the categorical FIM, those 2 static ones that are available. The dynamic FIM, so we have a couple different things here going on. The first one is the RFC, which stands for River Forecast Center. And that's the 5-day maximum forecast. Again, so this one's going to take the River Forecast Centers, or the Weather Service's River Forecast product each day, and it's going to look at what the 5-day maximum is for each and generate that FIM 5 miles up and downstream of every forecast point that we have. And again, only when there's high water. But say we have a spring flood across much of the state, there's going to be a whole lot of RFC 5-day FIMs available every single day for you to look at and see if they're changing much, see what may be inundated over the next 5 days. These are human-derived forecasts. There is a human entity, accounting for what's happening in these forecasts. There's a human involvement and adjustment being done every single day, oftentimes more than once a day too, during a flood. And so those are going to be, hopefully, I'm hoping they'll be pretty helpful for people once we get into a flooding situation. The next two, the NWM, National Water Model, it's a 5-day max forecast as well. The big thing here is that'll be what you have available to you if you don't have a official river forecast point near you, because that can cover a lot of places that we don't have gauging or forecast services for, which hopefully will help. Again, accuracy will go down. You just don't use it like house by house, zoom in on an area and just try to get a general sense, and then kind of evaluate it for yourself if you can, and know that it's a model and not necessarily reality. So for areas that we don't have gauging, we're going to do as much as we can to get images, drone images, or just go out and document what's flooded and what isn't, so we can continue to improve upon that. So it's going to have a 5-day max forecast based on that water model. It's also going to have a latest analysis, which is just to say currently what's flooded. Let me look at the map. Let me go around the state or go around the different areas and see what the Weather Service model is currently saying is flooded and how far that water goes. Here's a quick example of the partner FIM that I mentioned for St. Paul. This is our website display of it, but this is pretty advanced LiDAR based, and you can look at every different level. On the left, it may be hard to see, but you can click on different stages and just see what the FIM will show you for this stretch in St. Paul. It's not for all of St. Paul. Their domain was limited where they could do this, but this is a high quality level FIM. So I'll move on, I know, because that's only affecting folks in St. Paul. The CAT FIM, here's an example of what that looks like. Categorical FIM, and so those different colors you're seeing, the orange is minor flooding, the red is moderate flooding, the purple being major flooding, and then there's some blue under there that may be hard to see right on the edge of the purple, but that'd be your record flood. And so this is Jordan, Minnesota right here. So this is the Minnesota River. This one is not published yet, so I'm giving you kind of a sneak peek at what it could look like. So we're going to continue to QC it and make sure we're comfortable with what it's showing before we publish it. But we'll be doing that over the next several months here, publishing as much as we can as we go along here and evaluating these as we go. Here's an example of a 5-day max forecast. Again, this is from the River Forecast Center. This was from earlier this summer out near New Ulm. And so on a day where there's no high water, none of this blue would even show up. It would just show up blank to the user. But on this day, I was able to screen capture the max 5-day forecast from the RFC's forecast and show where it's showing the extent of the water. And we'll look at these in a little bit in a live situation. Just a quick example, water model FIM here. This is kind of cool. Down here on the lower right, there's a small stream near St. Benedict here. And so you can see it's modeling that, whereas these other sources don't model that. So if you have smaller streams, creeks, things like that, that you've never seen data like this for, the water model at least will give you something to go from. And so it's pretty cool to expand the service to such a huge stretch of river miles that have never had services like this before. These will update 4 times a day, overnight, early morning, early afternoon, and then in the evening on that cadence. And again, they're automatically generated. There's no quality control being done to these. So on the user end, if you're looking at these and you wanting to use it to make decisions or share this information, again, always a good idea to talk to us and see if we think it's on track, essentially. The latest analysis FIM, just so you know, I talked about it earlier, it's about 80 minutes lag time. So if you want to see what's the analysis at noon, you got to wait until about 1:20, 80 minutes later to see the noon analysis. But it comes out every hour an hour and 20 minutes beyond, beyond the next hour essentially. So, and you can look at, again, being the water model, you can look at gauged or ungauged areas. And so just know that the reliability again will decrease in the areas we don't have any gauges. We have no way to calibrate it to river stages, just in model world there. So knowing all that, that's where we just going to keep telling all of our partners, like, please don't take this forecast FIM output verbatim. Certainly don't use it on like a house by house case. If you zoom way in on a map and you're like, oh, that house is going to be dry and that house is going to flood. Well, don't take it to be that precise, because it's just not able to do that precision at this time. There are a lot of nuances to consider, and so again, we want to make sure folks understand that it's to be used more of a general sense, maybe a street level, not a house level, if that makes sense, in terms of where to expect flooding. FIM's not perfect. There's several different factors that can cause issues with it, from the synthetic rating curves being off to the different, the rating curves as the seasons change, and ours accurate that we're using for FIM. Our summer rating curves are different from our spring for sure. If you're looking at the River Forecast Center FIM, if the actual river forecast, just the hydrograph forecast is wrong, well, the FIM will be too, of course. So you can have differences like that happen. Again, just a reminder, the FIM assumes permanent flood protection measures like levees or flood walls will survive a flood. And if they don't, your FIM's not going to be accurate at all. And lastly, just again, it's designed for known waterways, creeks, rivers, things like that, does not handle lakes currently. Oh, and I should mention too, heavy rainfall, flash flooding, pluvial flooding, FIM does not handle that either. If you have 6 inches of rain over a community that there's no river running through and no creek that we can model those rises come up and spreading through the town, you could still get all sorts of flash flooding issues, but the FIM is not meant for that. It does not handle that. It only handles flooding from rising river channels and creeks and known waterways. So again, it currently only depicts the extent of inundation, not how deep the water is. It's limited to this 10-meter digital elevation model currently, although the hand method is being upgraded for a lot of places to something called Ripple, I mentioned earlier, and that has a finer resolution in that model. So we are seeing some improvements coming. And the Water Center does give us a lot of information in terms of their next couple year plans, and there are a lot of cool improvements coming, and they just take time. Especially once the FIM is fully operational across the whole entire country, even more resources can be used to then improve it from there once it's all out there and publicly available. But the simplified physics scheme does save a lot on our computing processing power, so that maybe if you're wondering, well, why don't you just upgrade everything to Ripple if it's better than hand? Well, that's a big part of it is the processing, but they're planning for that. They're planning for increasing that to handle that as they go along in the future years. And then outside of our RFC derived FIM, we're not able to adjust the FIM based on precipitation forecasts. So the RFC one will, because when we have an updated precip forecast for an event, the River Forecast Center takes that forecast rain and puts it into their model, and then the FIM comes out of that. But there's no other way for the other FIMs to adjust like that. So the RFC FIM will be unique there too, and should be helpful. In terms of the dynamic ones, if you have RFC FIM near you versus water model, it's definitely going to be preferred to use the RFC FIM. But again, talk with your local NWS office about the viability. So here's a quick summary here on how can we help you or help our partners using this product. Like I showed before, this is that same image, but similar to our other services, we'll be able to provide information like this. We'll be able to provide even more than what's on our public-facing website. We have access to different FIM products available internally to us, that some of those, as time goes along, maybe become public, but we have several different additional layers of FIM that we can look at, including like time to peak type information. So if you're wanting to get a little bit of help on assessing FIM, and even though, hey, what else can you guys see in the Weather Service that might be helpful, we can do that during a flooding event. So the big thing is just, again, talk to your Weather Service. Don't be shy. Send a chat. If you use chat, we have a Weather Service chat in Slack. If you're not sure what that is, let me know. I'd be happy to help get you connected. Pick up the phone, always good. Send an email. Although if you're in the heat of the moment in a flood event, you probably don't want to send an email. You probably want to call, and we'll be able to help. So again, a little repetitive here, but I'll just say that as we go forward in time and have flooding, any assistance that we can get from any of our partners, any of you all who know what flooded during a flood event, what roads flooded, what homes flooded, things like that, have images or drone footage, that's going to help us. I've been asking many of our partners that I've met, like, hey, if you have drones from even flooding from last year, I know we had a lot of it. Drone imagery is great because then we can take that, we can reference, well, the river was at this level when this picture was taken. Here's a picture of what was flooded. Send that over to the water center and they can evaluate the FIM there and adjust it. Maybe it's over inundating an area or maybe it's under inundating an area. They can make those adjustments so that for the next flood, it's a better service. So we don't have a huge capacity to get out and fly drones and take images like that ourselves. We try to get out on the road during a flood, but much of our work is needed here in the office during a flood. So we appreciate any help we can get for documenting floods and what happens, what are the impacts from the flooding. Here's some information. I'll show a lot of this, but I wanted to have this in here for reference, how to access the FIM on the Weather Service side. I'm just checking the time to make sure we're okay. Looks like we are. There's a direct link there to the FIM. There's a different link for the categorical FIMs. I'll kind of show this in a second. We also have a GIS viewer, a web-based one that we have, and I will preface this by saying it's got like every possible weather layer and water layer imaginable on it, so it can be a bit of a beast to sort through to look for what you're trying to find. But if you know how to use it, and if it's something you like to use, that kind of interface, you can use it to look at the FIM. And of course, I think one of the nicest things about it is being able to have bring it into your own local GIS service, bring these products in, and have them, you customize your own display of it. So there are several different versions of FIM available to be used and I went over many of them, but I'm again just going to leave these in here just so you can reference. If you want to start looking into bringing them into your own GIS services, all those different FIMs I talked about today will be available there once they're published. Currently on this list, everything is available except that categorical FIM, that first thing for most of southern Minnesota. But we're going to, like I said, over the next several months to year, we're going to be publishing as many of these as we can once we evaluate their viability. And so I have a couple links there at the bottom, how you can access those. And so I'll go into a demo here. And then we can try to leave some time for questions here at the end. My email is right there, and I'm sure Seal will make sure that people know how to contact me too, if you want to get a hold of me. All right, so I want to get into quick how to go about accessing FIM. Let's just start with weather.gov. We'll go there. So this is our main website for the Weather Service. And so if we go over here to rivers, lakes, rainfall, it's going to open this website called the National Water Prediction Service. You can see there's a big banner at the top. Flood inundation mapping services are now available for 60% of the U.S. population. So you can actually click on this information if you want. I'll open this quickly because this link here is going to show on the right-hand side a bunch of information about FIM, a fact sheet about FIM. You'll be able to find frequently asked questions. You'll be able to find instructions for the API access if you want to set it up in your own GIS display. So all that's here. I'll go back. So here's our main display. If we zoom in here on Minnesota, get that centered there. On the right-hand side, it's kind of, you can control what you're looking at on the map. So let's go down here and you'll see flood inundation on the right-hand side. You can go ahead and click enabled. It's going to give you a little splash screen telling you that these are experimental services. So we'll go on. And then you'll notice a red boundary popped up. that is actually highlighting the area that these services are available for. So you can kind of see in Minnesota, anything south of this red line, the FIM is available for currently. I'm going to open up this flood inundation menu so I can control what exactly we're seeing and the opacity and things like that. You can see that we're looking at the water model max forecast. That's the default. If you click on that, you see the other options. So these are those 3 dynamic FIMs I talked about in the presentation. So let's go ahead and start with the RFC. That's the max forecast. It doesn't say this, but you'll know that that's a 5-day prediction. And so we have a bunch of other information here in the legend. Just for use, so if you go ahead and zoom in, you'll see some areas over here in yellow, but nothing else lighting up, again, because it's for high water only. So let's run out to Montevideo here. As I zoom in, you're going to see a bunch of blue show up. You see the yellow, that's tied to the fact that we're at action stage currently. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch the map here. Oops, up here at the top. From topographic to satellite. Satellite's definitely the preferred way to look at this. You can kind of see what's being flooded. If I scroll down, I'm going to turn the opacity down. It's at 100% currently. We'll go down to maybe 40-ish percent. So if we zoom in here near the gauge, you can see here's the river. We can see, first of all, the bridge there on 212. If you zoom way in here, you can see that it's not inundated. And there's a little couple, those are just edges of grid cells there touching it, but really the way to interpret this is that the bridge will be dry at this level, which of course we know that because at action stage in Montevideo, we know that Highway 212 is high and dry from our impact statements for Montevideo. If you zoom out, you can kind of explore and you can look for some things that might be a little head scratching. So we have the Chippewa River that flows in. So there's a confluence right there. You could follow that northward if you want and see what it's doing at the action stage. It's not doing anything too crazy, which is good to see because we're only at action. This area over here, I've actually reported this area to the water center. It's disconnected from the river. There's a complete disconnect from inundation from here to the river. So that's something that should tell you, I don't trust that. I don't trust that inundation. It would have to be connected to the river. The FIM is just projecting as the river rises where that water spreads out to. There has to be a connection. And so when we see a discontinuity like this, that's something that we review and say, hey, water center, this area is over inundating. It's disconnected from the river. It's due to a catchment boundary issue. And so they're going to work on fixing that in one of their next updates. So look out for things like that. You may be wanting to look at, oh, Highway 7. And you can see as you zoom in, it's nice and dry. All the way through here. We can go downstream or upstream. Here's another street we can check on, which is good to see at action stage that it is dry, which would be the hope. So that's the RFC max forecast for the next 5 days. And so you can then go look to, if you want to look at your latest analysis, what is it right now? You can click on that. You can click on your max forecast from the water model. It's going to look probably pretty similar to what I just showed you. So, so again, that's how you're going to access these 3 dynamic FIM products, is coming to this web page and enabling your flood inundation and then looking around that way. So pretty handy, pretty cool that you can zoom way in and look at satellite and see if there are different homes or roads or things like that that are depicting flooding. So it's a pretty cool service. Once we feel good about a FIM for a certain area, I think it could be really helpful for folks. It's 10:21. I'll get into just how to access our static FIMs now quick. So I'm just going to jump over to this tab, starting fresh again at our National Water Prediction Service. Instead of going to FIM here on the legend, you're going to do this a different way. There's a couple ways to do it. I think the best way, if you wanted to look at the categorical FIMs, is just to go to more water information and click or hover over the flood and inundation mapping, and you can click on, you can see a list of categorical FIMs that are available or partner FIMs that are available, and then you can look at them. So I would go categorical FIM, And this is going to be broken down into each Weather Service office. And so if you go check this out today or over the next couple of weeks, you're not going to find any in Minnesota until we start publishing them. There are none published yet since it's so brand new. But like we can just take a look at an example. There's a good one in Missouri I was looking at earlier, and Jerome. So if you click on this, if I wanted to look at Jerome and look at the categorical FIM, and I just want to know, what does the FIM show when it's at minor, moderate, major, and record? I just want to know. I want to explore what we might have to watch out for if we get a flood that reaches major flood stage. You can click on it, and what it's going to do, sort of unfortunate, it just opens up the main page for Jerome, so you got to kind of know how to find what you're looking for. It's not too bad though. Here's the main hydrograph for Jerome. If you keep scrolling on down, you'll see a map right here. And so there's an option here to activate the categorical FIM. Now, if you click on many of other river forecast locations on the NWPS website and go and look, there's a map for a lot of these, but you'll see that there's no option to activate a categorical FIM until we publish them. So we'll turn that on. And now what we can see here for Jerome is a bunch of information, including not only those thresholds for minor, moderate, major, and record, but we also get 1 foot intervals between those thresholds. So we can go and see minor flooding starts at 15 feet in Jerome, but moderate doesn't start till 25. Now, if you're worried about a forecast that's taking it to 20 feet, just seeing the minor flood stage isn't going to tell you what you want to see. That's only going to tell you 15 feet. But since we've got these 1 foot intervals, you can leave those turned on, and I'll turn off a bunch of other stuff here. Clean up our map. Turn off action. So you can see what I've got turned on here. I'll go to satellite here. You can click on that. Change it to your satellite. So I have minor flooding. That's the solid orange over the river. And then I've got these 1 foot contours. They're a little difficult to see. Sometimes I get a little squirrely if there's a lot of terrain change going on, if you will, but it can be helpful. We can turn off the minor and just show the 1 foot interval contour, so you can see 15 would be here, and then you could go up a foot as you go. And so you can see that as you go to the right here of the river to the east, it would be going, the water level had to go up 1 foot each line from 15. And then we could get to moderate flood. Here we go. And that's what moderate flood stage will do. So the 1 foot intervals can be helpful if there's a big distance between, a minor and a moderate or a major. So here's major, and lastly, the record based. This is their record flood. Look at the FIM's representation of it. Homes along here showing flooding. It's even showing some flooding on an interstate just south of this, where the river goes down here in a low-lying area. So things like that you can be aware of if you get a record flood again. You can look at information like that. So with just a few minutes left, I think, Seal, I'll stop there and see if folks have questions.
But if anybody has questions, the one comment that was in chat was Gary had noted that he had also looked at that Montevideo area and thought that island area. And I had also, it's like, wait a minute, that shouldn't be flooded. So I'm glad you mentioned that you're looking at those kinds of things. And I heard you talking about encouraging communities to give you input on what does get flooded at the different levels. And on your site, you currently have the different triggers of what happens at different levels, but many of our local officials are on here today and really encourage you to provide information to the National Weather Service if you know about things that the National Weather Service isn't showing.
That would be, yes, thank you. So that would be great. Our flood impact statements on our website, I know some of those need to be just kind of expanded upon and evaluated. It's been some time for some of our forecast points. So if you know of flood impacts that we don't have listed, please let me know. And I'll also say that's how the Water Center is actually verifying the quality of their FIM. They're looking at those impact statements that we have listed and saying, well, the FIM shows at moderate flood, this road should be underwater, but their impact statement says it's not. It's not until major flooding, for example. So they use those impact statements to quality control their film. So those are hugely helpful too.
Hey, Shawn, this is
So,
Gary. I received a question offline, and is there any correlation or any, a lot of us manage administer a floodplain management ordinance, so we're always concerned about the FEMA 100-year, that 1% annual chance flood elevation. Is there anything in the FIM where you can almost compare the two, or is there anything in the FIM that even references those regulatory 100-year floodplain elevations?
Not in what you guys can see on our website. I will tell you, the minor flood stages oftentimes are pretty similar to those 1 in 100-year FEMA regulated maps. They're similar, but not always the case. And so, not really. I will say though that for us, when you contact us, we use a program called WaterView to look at all of our FIM information. So we can see everything that you guys can see on our website, but then we can see a bunch of other stuff too. And the FEMA maps are one of the services that we bring in and we compare. That is definitely something we try to do. If we think minor flooding at a gauge is similar to the 100-year flooding that they have assessed, then we'll be able to compare those. But if they're not, then we really can't do a fair comparison. But overall, the answer is really not really. But in some cases, we try to use minor flooding as a proxy, if that makes sense.
I know at some of the gauges that there has been effort to show what the 1% is in those trigger levels. Those what were you calling them? The impact levels?
Impact. We call them impact statements. Yep.
Impact statements. Yeah. So that's something that communities, if there's gauges that you'd like to see the 1% or other frequencies added, I believe National Weather Service can add those, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I just spent a couple of days down in Pine Island over the last week and a half surveying for a couple of rivers in that area, so we can add flood impact statements to our website for those new gauges there in Pine Island. So that just as an example. So, yep, we can come out, we can survey, we can add impact statements. It's something that I plan to do a lot of over the next couple of years, and look forward to doing so.
You're going to be a busy guy here.
Yeah, but you know what? That's all right. And working outdoors is always fun too.
Sure. Yeah, and it's very exciting. You mentioned some of the upcoming information that will be available in the next few months and years, and we look forward to hearing about those updates and being able to share that with folks. I think as our emergency managers understand this resource, there's going to be a lot of interest. I see we're already at 10:31, so appreciate folks being able to stick around. Just want to say thanks to everyone for attending and hope to see you next month.